Jonathan, welcome to the Vibrant Couple. You know that my life purpose is about creating more alive and vibrant couples, and I believe that one of the keys to that is two men becoming better men. I've known you for a few years. I've always been impressed with your integrity, how much effort you put in yourself becoming a better man. Please tell us more.
Yeah, I think you and I are connected for the reason that we're both interested in being better men, right? And I think for anyone that wants to have, as you're naming the title of your show, have a vibrant experience, I think whether it's in a couple or not, I think that for men, it's important for us to go on that journey. So for me, especially having been in a relationship for a while and understanding it's not easy, a lot of the times I personally spent blaming, and I would look at my partner and be like, it's her fault that this and this and that. But over time, as I did more inner work, more personal development work, personal growth work, men's work, however we want to title it, I realized that I was the problem. It was me. It was things that I was not, or I was still not resolved in, or things that I was still not aware of that I was doing that was causing a lot of the things that I was complaining about. And so it became a journey of me understanding who I wanted to be, not only in relation to the partnership I was in, but also in life. And so for me, becoming a better man became an understanding of, okay, there are certain things that I'm going to have to dive into. There are places that I'm going to have to look where I haven't wanted to look. And we can call that many different things, right? The dark places, the shadow. And as I began to look in all those places, I was finding the things that I was resisting to look at. And so for me, a lot of the work has been looking in those places and knowing after experiencing it that freedom is on the other side. But what I've learned is I didn't know that until I actually went into those dark places.
Please give us a few examples of things you've done to basically unlock those shadows that were haunting you.
hmm hmm Yeah. So, well, as a man, there's a lot of things that we hold shame about, right? And I think for all of us, it can look different. And one of the biggest things that I recognized was a lot of the resentments that I was holding on to and expectations that I was holding on to for men, and especially in our day and age. Like for me personally, it was around the dad, right? Holding certain resentments towards my dad, and then having been raised by primarily my mom in some ways, but the resentments I would hold on to, I realized that because of those emotions I was experiencing of resentment consistently, like and they were unconscious. And what that means is that I wasn't aware that I had resentments until I became aware that I had resentments and how that was causing trouble for me. And so for me to get really honest and look at my dad, for example, as someone that I held resentments towards, the way that he lived his life, the things that he did when I was growing up, there were certain things that was creating disconnection from me and him. And the interesting part was that because of that, it was also causing disconnection between me and other men, not only my dad. So by default, it was disconnecting me from the masculine figure in and of himself. And so there was a part of me that had a certain belief of what it meant to be a man, right? Work hard, never cry, always be happy, we're the provider. And there's nothing wrong with those things. But I began to see that for me personally, the things that I would see in my dad that I didn't want to be like, I started to realize that I was actually more like my father than I wanted to admit. And so that's when I began to truly develop a deeper compassion and start to, the more I started to do my work and start to see like, wow, that man is just a man who did his best. That man is just a man who has his own things that he's going through and experiencing. And so when I began to see him eye to eye, just as a friend, as a man, as a brother, and of course my father, I began to be able to heal a lot of those wounds. And it helped me ultimately to not only heal that relationship with my dad, but the beauty in doing that work as a man is that it also heals the relationship with other men as well. And that was the beautiful part, like me being able to connect with you, for example, when we hang out, it's not possible. I don't believe it'd be possible if I hadn't done that work to heal my relationship with men. So I'm sure you can relate to that as well.
That work with your dad, is that inner work of developing compassion and understanding, or is it something that you specifically did with him?
There's layers to it in terms of how we can approach this work, right? And we can call it many things. And to put it simply, for me, when the awareness sparked was, many years ago, I had a certain expectation about what my dad should be doing with his life. He should change. He should be like this. He should be like that. And I was actually in a coaching session with another fella, and I was telling him about my struggles, wanting to connect with my father. And then he asked me, he says, "Hey, Jonathan, okay, think about this. If your dad was living the life that you want him to live, if he was doing all the things, going to the workshops, having the coaches or whatever, and if you saw him living the life that you envisioned for him, would you call him more? Would you see him more? Would you feel more love for him?" And it was in that moment that I realized the answer was yes. But the big thing is, in that moment, I realized that I was being conditional with my love. And what that means is I really was having expectations, and that in essence was, I have all these expectations that if you don't meet them, I won't love you as much as I would if you did. And it was a huge aha moment to be like, wow, where else is this happening in my life where I have expectations of people and I crave connection with them? And going back to what I was saying earlier, is I was the problem of the disconnection because of the expectations that I had. So once I started to become aware of the conditions I was requiring for this man to meet, otherwise I wouldn't love him the way that I could, I began to let go of those conditions, those expectations, and all of a sudden the connection I desired started to be there. And that included a lot of forgiveness, right? And just letting go. Now, one thing I want to say is that it doesn't mean that there are certain things that happened that I was okay with, right? That there's certain things that I don't agree with. But forgiveness to me means being able to let that go and just allowing that to be an experience that happened. But it doesn't mean that we have to agree with it, right? So that's something that I've learned to help me with the forgiveness process, because I believe that there's other places where I wouldn't be able to forgive because I didn't agree with it. But then I realized, well, I don't have to agree with it. And I can forgive and realize that they were doing their best based on what they knew. So that's what it's looked like. And now today, I always stay aware of where I'm setting conditions with people and how that can create disconnection. It's very interesting.
If you were to give a metric on your percentage of forgiveness with your father, what percentage would you give you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think at this point, it's 100%, and it's taken years to do that. It's not just like I wake up and I forgive and now I'm all healed, right? Because I can do that mentally, but when I look at him, can I really feel that I'm clear with all of the things from the past? And so that has always been my gauge, right? Like, if there were certain things that I would want him to do or need him to do, and I would kind of force it. But the truth is, now when I'm with him, I can just be with him as he is and not need him to be any different, and just honor his own journey, right? So, you asked me that question a year or 2 years ago, I'd have been like, probably like 50 to 60%. Yeah.
And so I've met you in men's groups where I've always been impressed with your energy and your dedication and how you hold space. How has that work with your dad, that work with men, changed your relationship to the feminine?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I think that the more I was able to cultivate my power in terms of feeling empowered, and what that means to me is not needing to get the approval or validation from the outside, in other words, from men, right? So a lot of the things that I desired from my dad was the attention, the approval, someone telling me I'm doing good, someone telling me I'm doing well. And so when I started to be in groups where there were a lot of other, what we can call conscious men, meaning that they're also doing the work. That's all that really means, is that they're also doing the work. And you start to meet men who are older and wiser, and they hold a certain space and they have a certain energy about them that perhaps we desired in our father figures, right? So for me, it's so important to be in that, because I learned that the more I was in places where the energy was of a healthy masculine, where people were taking ownership, responsibility, staying in integrity, and I started to have other men really see me as not broken, as empowered. And it doesn't mean that they wouldn't have empathy, but they wouldn't have sympathy. And what that means is that just because I was sad doesn't, they wouldn't sit there and coddle me and try and make me feel better while I was being a victim, right? They would say like, okay, yeah, we understand where you're coming from and we love you. And what are you going to do about it? And so it challenged me to come out of my victimization and be like, okay, if I want to change my life, it's up to me. And so those men held me. And then what I was able to cultivate was an ability to find my own voice, find my own power, find my own will, and not depend on the outside for that approval or validation. And so then when I look at how that's changed my relationship to the feminine, it's that before I would crave that validation and approval from the feminine, right? And so now it doesn't mean that we're not nurtured by the feminine, but when I'm with the feminine now, I come whole, meaning I don't need you, but I want you, but I don't need you. And so that's taken, again, years to cultivate, but I understand what it means now, because I come to a connection whole, complete, not broken. However, it's almost like a yes and, where it's like, I'm already beautiful, whole, and complete, and we can build something even more beautiful together, rather than before I would feel broken and I don't feel complete unless I have you.
You mentioned ending with a girlfriend a while back as a way of somehow, finding who you were. Where are you at? Do you have a girlfriend these days?
Not currently. That woman, I'm still very connected with her. We're extraordinary friends. And there was a place where, at that point, is when I started to get into all this type of work, right? And I think that the initial instinct was for me to run away. Like, okay, I realize this hasn't been serving me. I'm just going to run away from the whole thing and then find someone who's more conscious. That was the thought I had, because I was so conscious and I was doing the work and all the stuff. And so back in that time, the way that transitioned, what was that I started to realize, okay, the thing I want is connection with this individual, right? This human being that I love and adore. But again, going back to the story I shared with my dad, I realized I was having conditions. Like, I will only give you my full self, my full heart, if you fill in the blank. And I had a lot of those. And so when I started to just let go of those shoulds and conditions, I started to notice, like, for me to receive them, I was having to open my heart more. I was having to just be loving without having conditions. And so ultimately, I ended up doing a lot of work with her. And we came to a place where we were able to heal a lot of the things that were blocking us back in the time. And then we arrived at a point where we realized, hey, we've changed in different ways and things are going in a different direction now. But we felt complete in the process. And so therefore, it wasn't so much like the traditional is like, oh, well, you end a relationship and you never talk to the person. But for me personally, it was like, no, that sounds stupid. If I love this human being, why can't there be a way where we end this consciously and there's a way to stay connected in a way that's healthy that we both agree with, right? So the thing I realized too was that when I left the relationship, it was also me wanting to go on a path of self-discovery, of me realizing, okay, who am I not being in a relationship? Because that's all I knew at that point, right? And that was a lot. I mean, I remember when I first departed from the relationship, my nervous system was reacting, because it's like I felt the voice in my nervous system saying, what are you going to do with all that love that you had there? And so it was beautiful, because all the love that I was essentially addicted to receiving from somebody else, like an outside source. Nothing wrong with that, but I had to learn to give that to myself without being dependent. And that was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And that takes years, right? And that is the work, I believe. And that's what it's been for me, is when I departed, it was really me going on a journey of really asking myself, what would it be like to feel whole and complete just with me, just with myself, not needing anybody else, so to say.
That's a wonderful place to be, to make space for your next girlfriend, life partner, so that she can have full range and freedom of expression without, oh, no, I should say without, with much less expectations from you.
Right, right. Yeah, and that's a good point, because I want to preface all this by saying that it doesn't mean that nothing comes up and that we don't have expectations anymore, right? Like I notice it still comes up. But the thing is, because we've done more work, you over time we become more aware of it, right? So I can't. It would be stupid of me to think that none of those patterns might not reemerge. It's just more consciousness around it.
So when they show up, you'll spot them much quicker and you'll be able to dissolve them quicker and also take responsibility for them.
Yeah, 100%. And that's really what it's about, right? Because we just get much quicker at doing it versus before it would take days and days.
Mhm. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
And the joke I'm making is for me, it was years and years.
Maybe that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to that point, I just want to say a big thing for me in becoming a better man, and the topic of this conversation has been to, we talked about being in groups that are supportive, like the men's groups and that type of thing. But I think that, as you're saying, like sometimes we might realize that we've been in a certain pattern for a long time. And so for me personally, my journey has been one of being compassionate with myself, being caring with myself, and giving myself that love that I so craved. So I would hold myself. I would allow myself to feel everything I was feeling, but really care for my well-being. And again, as I went through the process, being patient and compassionate, and knowing that I'm doing the work, right? But I have times I want to rush my process. Like, oh, I see that man over there doing great things. Why can't I just be like them now? And I had to really come to terms that I'm on my own individual journey. And so to compare myself to them is stupid, because they're them, I'm me. And I have to work through what I needed to work through. So when I stopped comparing myself, it really helped me come to a place of more patience, because I realized, to your point, there were certain things I'm like, oh my God, I've been doing that for like 10 years.
And so I want to call you on the stupid part, partially because I'm twice your age, and partially because I would have loved to be like you when I was 30. Now that I'm in a role in which I guide other men and I work with others on their love and intimate relationships as a way of, freeing the baggage and creating more listening and understanding and playfulness and levity between
Yes.
people. And so, what advice would you give to young men and the ones around young men, their girlfriends, their mothers, their fathers? What advice would you have for them on how to help young men become better men?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I would say a lot of it depends on the different age range, right? And a lot of what I've learned too, and this I think depends on everybody's spiritual beliefs, right? So who knows? Maybe I have thousands of more lifetimes than you in this whole game, right? So the age part is interesting, because I believe, my own personal belief is that spiritual and emotional maturity don't have an age, right? So therefore, I think for a lot of the young men who might be watching this, and they might be 22, 23, 24, sometimes there's a belief that, well, I can't be that mature until I'm X years old. And there's certain life experiences that I do agree come with time, right? But I think that as we start to delve into putting ourselves in the experiences that challenge us to look at the things that we don't want to look at, that's when we start to gain a deeper maturity. Because again, someone might be 60 years old, right? But they might not have an experience that you put yourself into consciously until they're like 70. So therefore that's what becomes interesting. And I started to notice for me personally, as being, when I started this work, I was 25, 26. I was consciously thinking, okay, what are the things that people who have a lot of wisdom, what are the things that they're doing? And how can I consciously put myself into those types of experiences now and not wait for a crisis? So if there are people, and I believe your question also was about, if there are certain people like you who are supporting younger men, what advice I would have for them. Is that right?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that not trying to rush their process is one. And then also knowing that I think the young generation, younger, I say young, but I'm talking like 18 through like 25, they're already interested in this type of work, which is very cool. And because of the culture that we've created around instant gratification, you post a picture on Instagram and you get all the likes. There's also this feeling that because I did a meditation, my life should be different by tomorrow, right? Or because I had this hard conversation, now my whole life should change in an instant. And so I believe that for the older folks supporting younger people, I think there's a piece of patience and peace that should be instilled, because I think that this instant gratification carries on into this type of work, and people want to heal their past in an instant, right? They want to just get rid of it. They want to just go through it. But as you and I know, it takes time, it takes patience, it takes compassion with yourself. And so being able to demonstrate that patience, being able to demonstrate that there's no rush, right? That everyone's going through their individual process, being able to demonstrate that and be an example of that, I think is the best thing we can do, because I've learned, and science shows this, especially for young kiddos, that there are mirror neurons in our brain that when we watch someone else and how they operate and we resonate with that it instills something in us. And that's why role models are so important. I think you and I are examples, and anybody who finds someone they admire and then they learn how they're doing certain things and we role model them, but then we go about it in our own unique way. So for anybody that's supporting other young men, I would just say help them understand that there's no rush, no need to be impatient. And as a matter of fact, the more impatient we get, the more we're holding ourselves back, which is an interesting dynamic.
I want to thank you and I want to pause for a second because for the last 20 minutes or so we've been talking. I've gotten a deeper and deeper sense of you, and likely through mirror neurons, likely through mirror neurons, that deep quality of peace with yourself, of learning to be with what is. So, whoever is watching, please somehow. Pay attention and look at that beautiful smile and depth in Jonathan's eyes and know that this is what he carries as his utmost gifts and skills to the world. So, Jonathan, thank you. I'm pretty sure many will benefit from our conversation, and I don't know if your next girlfriend will come from from this
Hey,
interview.
perhaps.
All I know is that she'll be a very happy woman. If this video inspired you to become a better man or to support someone you know to become a better man, please hit the like button below and subscribe so you can be notified when I publish new juicy content. Please pass along to all your friends and family you think would benefit. I look forward to seeing you very soon.